The morning sun cast long shadows across my ranch as I walked toward the pasture, coffee mug in hand, breathing in the crisp Texas air. My name is Jake Martinez, and I've been running this horse ranch for 15 years now, ever since I inherited it from my grandfather. The property sits on 200 acres of prime hill country land, complete with a natural spring-fed pond that's been the heart of this place for generations. I'd never imagined that pond would become the center of such controversy, or that my peaceful morning routine would soon be interrupted by flashing police lights and the shrill voice of my neighbor, Karen Whitmore, demanding justice for what she considered an environmental catastrophe. The trouble started 3 months ago when the Homeowners Association expanded their jurisdiction to include properties like mine that bordered their pristine subdivision, Whispering Oaks Estates. Karen had been elected president of the HOA board, and she took her duties seriously, perhaps too seriously. She'd moved to Texas from Connecticut 2 years prior, bringing with her a rigid set of expectations about how rural properties should be managed. My ranch had been operating long before Whispering Oaks existed, back when this area was nothing but cattle ranches and wide open spaces. But suburban sprawl had crept closer each year, and now my property line ran directly adjacent to Karen's perfectly manicured backyard, separated only by a split-rail fence that my grandfather had built decades ago. The Mustangs arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I'd been contacted by the Bureau of Land Management about providing temporary sanctuary for a small herd of wild horses that had been rounded up from overpopulated ranges in Nevada. These weren't just any horses, they were part of a special program working with Border Patrol to train certain animals for patrol work along the Rio Grande. Agent Maria Santos had explained the situation to me over the phone. "We've got 12 Mustangs, Mr. Martinez. Beautiful animals, but they need somewhere to decompress and undergo evaluation before we can determine which ones might be suitable for patrol training. Your ranch came highly recommended." I'd agreed immediately. The idea of helping preserve these magnificent creatures while supporting border security efforts appealed to me. Plus, the government compensation would help with some much-needed repairs around the ranch. The Mustangs were stunning. Their coats ranged from deep chestnut to silver gray, and their wild spirits were evident in every movement. The lead stallion, a magnificent bay with a white blaze down his face, commanded respect from both his herd and anyone who observed him. I named him Coronado, after the Spanish explorer. The horses settled in quickly, and I noticed they were particularly drawn to the pond. On hot afternoons, they would wade in to cool off, sometimes swimming across to the deeper sections. It was a beautiful sight, these wild creatures enjoying the freedom of the water, their powerful bodies cutting through the surface as they played and socialized. I should have anticipated Karen's reaction. The first complaint came on a Thursday. I was repairing fence posts when I heard the distinctive click of high heels on gravel. Karen approached wearing her usual uniform, pressed khakis, a polo shirt with the Whispering Oaks logo, and an expression that suggested she'd discovered something deeply offensive. "Mr. Martinez," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for addressing someone she considered beneath her station. "We need to discuss your horses." I set down my post-hole digger and walked over to meet her at the fence line. "What about them, Mrs. Whitmore?" "They're contaminating the watershed," she declared, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be environmental regulations. "I've been researching, and allowing livestock to swim in natural water sources violates several county ordinances regarding water quality protection." I suppressed a laugh. "Karen, those aren't livestock. They're wild Mustangs, and this pond has had horses drinking from it and swimming in it for over a century. My grandfather's horses, my father's horses, and now these horses. The ecosystem has adapted just fine." Her face flushed red. "Wild or not, they're under your care, which makes you responsible for their environmental impact. I've documented multiple instances of these animals defecating in and around the water source. This poses a serious health risk to our community." "Your community gets its water from the municipal system," I pointed out. "This pond doesn't connect to any public water supply." "That's not the point," Karen snapped. "Property values in Whispering Oaks have increased 23% since I became HOA president. I won't allow some cowboy's hobby farm to jeopardize our investment." The word cowboy dripped with disdain, and I felt my temper rising. "This isn't a hobby farm, Mrs. Whitmore. This is a working ranch that's been in my family for 3 generations. And those horses aren't pets, they're part of a federal program." "Federal program?" She scoffed. "What kind of federal program involves letting wild animals run loose?" I explained about the Border Patrol partnership, but I could see she wasn't listening. Her mind was already made up, and she was simply looking for ammunition to support her predetermined conclusion. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the county," she announced. "And I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting to discuss this situation. We have rights as property owners, and we won't be intimidated by your threats about federal involvement." After she left, I called Agent Santos to give her a heads up about the potential trouble. Maria listened patiently as I described the encounter. "This isn't unusual," she said with a sigh. "We run into NIMBY situations all the time. People want border security, but they don't want to deal with the practical aspects of providing it. Don't worry too much about it, Jake. We'll handle any official complaints that come through proper channels." But Karen wasn't content to work through proper channels. Over the next 2 weeks, she launched a campaign that would have impressed a political operative. She created a Facebook group called Protect Whispering Oaks Water Quality and began posting daily updates about the contamination crisis happening right in their backyard. Her posts were masterpieces of selective editing and inflammatory language. Photos of the Mustangs swimming were captioned with warnings about uncontrolled animal waste and environmental destruction. She shared links to studies about agricultural runoff, conveniently ignoring the fact that 12 horses on 200 acres hardly constituted industrial-scale agriculture. The Facebook group grew rapidly, attracting not just residents of Whispering Oaks but environmental activists from across the region who were outraged by what Karen portrayed as a case of corporate agriculture destroying pristine waterways. She never mentioned that the horses were part of a federal program, instead referring to them as Jake Martinez's commercial livestock operation. I tried to ignore the online drama, but it became harder when Karen's supporters started driving by my ranch to take photos and videos. Some even trespassed onto my property, claiming they were documenting environmental crimes. I had to post no trespassing signs along the entire fence line. The situation escalated when Karen convinced the HOA board to hire an environmental consulting firm to test the pond water. The results, predictably, showed elevated levels of bacteria typically associated with animal waste. Karen triumphantly posted the results online, along with dire warnings about the health risks posed to the entire community. What she didn't mention was that the same bacteria levels could be found in virtually any natural water source where wildlife congregated. Deer, raccoons, birds, and countless other animals used the pond daily, just as they had for centuries. The Mustangs were simply the most visible contributors to what was actually a healthy, functioning ecosystem. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a wildlife biologist from the local university, tried to provide some scientific context in response to Karen's posts. She explained that natural water sources weren't meant to meet drinking water standards, and that the bacterial levels Karen was citing were well within normal ranges for a pond that supported diverse wildlife. But Karen dismissed Dr. Thompson's expertise, claiming she was probably in cahoots with the rancher and that real science supported her position. She began sharing increasingly alarmist articles about water contamination, many of which dealt with industrial pollution situations that bore no resemblance to my ranch. The breaking point came on a sweltering July afternoon. I was working in the barn when I heard raised voices from the direction of the pond. I walked over to investigate and found Karen standing at the fence line with a professional-looking camera, documenting the Mustangs as they cooled off in the water. "You can't take photos of my property without permission," I called out. "I'm standing on public right-of-way," she replied without looking up from her camera. "And I have every right to document environmental crimes." "Environmental crimes?" I laughed. "Karen, you're watching horses swim. This isn't exactly the Exxon Valdez." She turned to face me, her expression fierce. "Mock me all you want, Mr. Martinez, but I have a responsibility to protect this community. These animals are destroying our water quality, and I won't stand by and watch it happen." "Have you ever actually tested your tap water?" I asked. "Because I guarantee it comes from the municipal treatment plant, not from my pond." "That's not the issue," she snapped. "The issue is environmental responsibility and property values. Your little horse playground is affecting the entire neighborhood." I was about to respond when Coronado, the lead stallion, decided to make his presence known. He'd been grazing nearby and apparently took exception to Karen's raised voice. He trotted over to the fence line, snorted loudly, and fixed Karen with a stare that could have melted steel. Karen stumbled backward, nearly dropping her camera. "That animal is threatening me." "He's on my side of the fence," I pointed out. "And he's not threatening anyone. He's just curious about all the noise." But Karen was already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff. This is harassment, and I won't tolerate it." I watched in amazement as she dialed 911 and reported that she was being threatened by dangerous animals and that the owner was refusing to control his livestock. She made it sound like I was running some kind of wild animal sanctuary without proper permits. 20 minutes later, Deputy Sheriff Tom Rodriguez arrived in his patrol car. Tom had known me since high school, and he looked embarrassed as he got out of his vehicle. "Hey, Jake," he said with a sheepish grin. "Got a call about some kind of animal incident?" Karen immediately launched into her prepared speech about environmental destruction and public safety hazards. She showed Tom her water quality test results and explained how the horses were contaminating the entire watershed. Tom listened patiently, occasionally glancing at me with barely concealed amusement. When Karen finished her presentation, he walked over to the fence and looked at the Mustangs, who were peacefully grazing in the afternoon sun. "These are some beautiful horses," he said. "Wild Mustangs?" "That's right," I confirmed. "They're part of a Border Patrol training program. Agent Maria Santos with CBP can verify that if needed." Tom nodded. "I thought they might be. My brother works for Border Patrol, and he mentioned they were partnering with local ranchers for horse training." Karen's face went pale. "Border Patrol? You never mentioned Border Patrol. I tried to tell you 3 weeks ago," I reminded her. "You said it didn't matter what kind of federal program it was." Tom pulled out his notebook. "Ma'am, exactly what crime are you reporting here?" Karen stammered for a moment before regaining her composure. "Environmental contamination, water quality violations, improper livestock management." "But these aren't livestock," Tom said gently. "They're federal assets being temporarily housed under a government contract. And as for environmental issues, that would be a matter for the EPA or the County Environmental Office, not the Sheriff's Department." "So you're not going to do anything?" Karen demanded. Tom shrugged. "There's nothing for me to do. No laws are being broken, no one's being threatened, and no crimes are being committed. These horses have every right to be here, and they have every right to use that pond." After Tom left, Karen stood at the fence line for several more minutes, staring at the Mustangs with undisguised hatred. Finally, she turned and walked back toward her house, but I could tell this wasn't over. I was right. The next morning, I woke to find 3 county vehicles parked in my driveway. Officials from the Environmental Health Department, Animal Control, and the building inspector had all received complaints about my illegal animal operation. The environmental health inspector, a tired-looking man named Bill Hayes, seemed apologetic as he explained the situation. "We got a formal complaint about water contamination and improper animal waste management. I have to investigate, but between you and me, this looks like a neighbor dispute that got out of hand." The animal control officer, Sandra Mills, was more direct. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I can tell when someone's wasting my time. These horses are clearly well cared for, and you've got proper facilities. But I still have to document everything for the complaint file." The building inspector found nothing wrong with my structures, the environmental officer found no violations of county ordinances, and the animal control officer confirmed that the horses were healthy and properly maintained. All 3 officials seemed frustrated that they'd been called out for what was obviously a frivolous complaint. But Karen wasn't deterred. She filed appeals with every agency, demanding second opinions and additional testing. She contacted the State Environmental Agency, the Texas Department of Agriculture, and even tried to get the EPA involved. Each investigation reached the same conclusion: no violations, no problems, no basis for action. But the constant stream of inspectors and investigators was wearing on me, and I could tell it was stressing the horses as well. The situation reached its absurd climax on a humid August morning. I was cleaning stalls when I heard the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles approaching fast. I looked up to see not 1, not 2, but 4 police cars racing up my driveway, lights flashing and sirens wailing. Behind them came Karen's white SUV, followed by what appeared to be a news van from the local TV station. The entire convoy pulled up near the pond, where several of the Mustangs had been enjoying their morning swim. Sheriff Mike Patterson himself got out of the lead car, looking thoroughly annoyed. He was followed by Deputies Rodriguez and Martinez, along with 2 officers I didn't recognize. Karen emerged from her SUV clutching a thick folder of documents and wearing what appeared to be a new outfit purchased specifically for this occasion. "Sheriff Patterson," she called out, her voice pitched for the news cameras. "Thank you for responding so quickly to this environmental emergency." The sheriff looked around at the peaceful scene. Horses grazing, birds singing, a gentle breeze rippling the pond surface, and his expression grew even more sour. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said with barely controlled patience. You called 911 and reported an immediate threat to public safety and environmental terrorism. I brought half my department expecting to find some kind of disaster, and instead I see horses swimming in a pond. Those horses are contaminating our water supply, Karen insisted, waving her folder. I have documentation of bacterial levels that exceed safe standards, and this man refuses to take corrective action. At that moment, Agent Maria Santos arrived in an unmarked Border Patrol vehicle. She'd been conducting her monthly inspection of the Mustangs when she heard the commotion and decided to investigate. What's going on here? She asked, flashing her badge. Sheriff Patterson looked relieved. Agent Santos, I presume? We've got a complaint about these horses, but I'm told they're part of a federal program. That's correct, Maria confirmed. These animals are federal assets being evaluated for potential service with Border Patrol. Mr. Martinez is operating under a federal contract to provide sanctuary and preliminary training. Karen's face went through several interesting color changes. Federal contract? You never mentioned a federal contract. Actually, I said, I mentioned it several times. You just chose not to listen. The news reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chin, approached with her cameraman. Mrs. Whitmore, you called our newsroom and said there was an environmental crisis happening here. Can you explain what we're looking at? Karen suddenly seemed to realize that the optics of the situation weren't working in her favor. For police cars, multiple deputies, and a Border Patrol agent had all responded to her complaint about horses swimming in a pond. Even to a casual observer, it looked like a massive overreaction. These animals are polluting our water, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Agent Santos stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm not sure what your concerns are, but these horses are under federal protection. They're part of a program that directly supports national security operations along our southern border. Any interference with this program could be considered obstruction of federal law enforcement activities. The words federal law enforcement and obstruction had a magical effect on everyone present. The sheriff's deputies suddenly looked very interested in examining their shoes, and Karen's supporters from the HOA began backing away from the cameras. Jessica Chin sensed the story pivoting in an unexpected direction. Agent Santos, can you tell us more about this Border Patrol program? Maria was happy to explain. The Border Patrol Horse Patrol Unit has been using horses for border security operations since 1904. These Mustangs are being evaluated for their suitability for patrol work in difficult terrain along the Rio Grande. They're incredibly valuable animals, and Mr. Martinez is providing an essential service by caring for them during the evaluation process. And the swimming? Jessica asked. Horses need exercise and enrichment, Maria explained. Swimming is excellent conditioning for animals that may need to work in and around water. It's actually an important part of their training regimen. Karen tried to interject with her water quality concerns, but Maria had an answer for that too. Ma'am, we've had these horses evaluated by veterinarians and environmental specialists. Natural swimming behavior poses no threat to local water systems. In fact, horses have been using water sources throughout this region for thousands of years. The sheriff decided he'd heard enough. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to stop filing false emergency reports. You've wasted significant departmental resources with these frivolous complaints. False reports. Karen sputtered. I have documentation. You have test results showing that a natural pond contains bacteria, Sheriff Patterson replied. That's not an emergency, it's basic biology. If you continue to abuse the 911 system, I'll have to consider charges for filing false reports. The news crew began packing up their equipment, clearly disappointed that the promised environmental crisis had turned into a story about federal law enforcement and frivolous complaints. Karen stood alone by her SUV, clutching her folder of documents and looking like someone who just realized she'd made a terrible mistake. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 days later, I received a visit from someone I hadn't expected, Congressman Robert Hayes, who represented our district in Washington. He arrived in a black SUV with 2 aides and a serious expression. Mr. Martinez, he said, extending his hand, I understand you're housing Mustangs for the Border Patrol program. That's right, Congressman. Is there a problem? He smiled. Quite the opposite. I've been hearing about some local opposition to the program, and I wanted to see the operation for myself. Border security is a top priority for this district, and I want to make sure our federal partners have the support they need. We walked out to the pasture where the Mustangs were grazing. Congressman Hayes was clearly impressed by the animals and the facilities. He asked detailed questions about the training program and the horse's progress. "These are magnificent animals," he said, watching Coronado demonstrate his swimming skills. "And this is exactly the kind of innovative approach we need for border security." One of his aides was taking photos and notes. "We'd like to feature this program in our next newsletter," she explained. "It's a great example of federal-local cooperation and efficient use of resources." As we talked, I noticed Karen watching from her backyard. She'd been unusually quiet since the incident with the sheriff, but I could see her taking photos of the congressman's visit. That evening, Karen made one last desperate attempt to salvage her campaign. She posted on her Facebook group claiming that political corruption was protecting the environmental criminals and that federal bureaucrats were covering up the water contamination scandal. But her support had evaporated. Even her most ardent followers seemed to realize that opposing a border patrol program wasn't a winning position. Several members of the HOA board publicly distanced themselves from her complaints, and the Whispering Oaks residents began expressing embarrassment about the negative attention their community had received. The final blow came when Dr. Thompson, the wildlife biologist, published an op-ed in the local newspaper explaining the ecological benefits of allowing horses to use natural water sources. She described how horses had been part of the local ecosystem for centuries and how their presence actually supported biodiversity. "The idea that horses swimming in a pond constitutes environmental damage," she wrote, "demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of natural systems. These animals are engaging in behavior that's been part of this landscape since long before humans arrived." Karen's response was to accuse Dr. Thompson of being part of a conspiracy involving ranchers, federal agents, and corrupt politicians. But by then, even her most loyal supporters were beginning to question her judgment. The breaking point came during the next HOA board meeting. Karen had called for a vote of no confidence in my environmental practices and demanded that the board take legal action to force removal of the horses. But the other board members had done their homework. They consulted with lawyers who explained that the HOA had no jurisdiction over federal programs and that any legal action would likely result in expensive lawsuits that the association would lose. More importantly, they'd been contacted by several residents who were actually proud that their community was supporting border security efforts. The negative publicity from Karen's campaign had damaged the neighborhood's reputation, and property values were beginning to suffer. The vote was unanimous. The HO would take no action regarding the Mustang program, and Karen would be censured for making unauthorized statements on behalf of the association. Karen resigned from the board the next day, citing corruption and environmental negligence by her fellow members. She put her house on the market 2 weeks later and moved back to Connecticut, claiming that Texas was too uncivilized for someone with her standards. The Mustangs continued their training program without further interference. Over the following months, 8 of the 12 horses were selected for active duty with Border Patrol units along the Rio Grande. The remaining 4 were adopted by qualified handlers who would continue their training for other law enforcement applications. Coronado, the magnificent stallion who had inadvertently helped end Karen's campaign by simply being a horse, was among those selected for border duty. Agent Santos told me he showed exceptional intelligence and courage, qualities that would serve him well in his new career protecting America's borders. The pond returned to its peaceful existence, with horses, wildlife, and the occasional visiting dignitary all sharing its waters without incident. The bacterial levels remained exactly where they'd always been, within normal ranges for a healthy natural ecosystem. Congressman Hayes featured the Mustang program in several newsletters and press releases, praising it as an example of innovative approaches to border security. The positive publicity helped attract additional federal contracts for horse training, and my ranch became a recognized center for equine law enforcement programs. Dr. Thompson used the incident as a case study in her environmental science classes, demonstrating how scientific ignorance and political activism could combine to create unnecessary conflicts. Her students learned valuable lessons about the importance of understanding ecological systems before attempting to regulate them. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Margaret Foster, took a much more collaborative approach to community relations. She organized a neighborhood barbecue where residents could meet the Mustangs and learn about their important work. Many of the same people who had supported Karen's complaints became enthusiastic advocates for the program once they understood its purpose. Jessica Chin, the news reporter, won a regional journalism award for her follow-up story about the incident. Her piece, titled "When Environmental Activism Goes Wrong," became required reading in several college media ethics courses. Sheriff Patterson used the incident as a training example for his deputies, emphasizing the importance of investigating complaints thoroughly before responding with multiple units. The Karen Whitmore case became departmental legend, referenced whenever someone reported an obviously frivolous emergency. As for me, I learned valuable lessons about the importance of community communication and the power of social media to amplify misunderstandings. I started a ranch blog where I regularly posted updates about the horses and their training, helping neighbors understand what we were doing and why it mattered. The Mustang program continued to grow and evolve. We began hosting school groups and scout troops, educating young people about wild horse conservation and border security. The ranch became a bridge between the rural and suburban communities, helping people understand that agriculture and conservation could coexist with development and progress. On quiet mornings, I still walk out to the pond with my coffee and watch whatever horses happen to be in residence. Sometimes they're Mustangs destined for border patrol duty, sometimes they're retired law enforcement horses enjoying peaceful retirement, and sometimes they're young horses just beginning their training journey. But they all share one thing in common: they love that pond. They drink from it, play in it, swim across it, and cool off in it during hot summer days. They do exactly what horses have been doing in that spot for generations, completely oblivious to the human drama that once swirled around their simple desire to enjoy the water. The pond itself seems unchanged by all the controversy. The spring continues to feed it with clear, cold water, the wildlife continues to depend on it for sustenance, and the ecosystem continues to function exactly as it has for thousands of years. The bacterial levels that once caused such alarm remain within normal ranges, supporting a diverse community of plants and animals that have adapted to this environment over countless generations. Sometimes I think about Karen and wonder if she ever realized how wrong she'd been. Did she understand that her crusade against environmental contamination had actually targeted one of the most natural and ecologically appropriate activities imaginable? Did she recognize that her attempt to protect property values had actually damaged her community's reputation and driven down prices? But mostly, I don't think about Karen at all. She was a brief disruption in the long history of this place, a reminder that progress and change can sometimes create unexpected conflicts between people with different values and perspectives. The Mustangs taught me something important during those difficult months. They never stopped being themselves, never stopped doing what horses do, never let human drama interfere with their essential nature. They swam when they wanted to swim, grazed when they wanted to graze, and maintained their dignity throughout the entire controversy. There's wisdom in that approach. Sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is simply to continue doing what you know is right, trusting that truth and common sense will eventually prevail. The ranch continues to thrive, the horses continue to swim, and the pond continues to support the diverse ecosystem that has called it home for millennia. The only thing that's really changed is that we now have better documentation of our environmental practices and stronger relationships with our federal partners. And sometimes, on particularly quiet mornings, I swear I can hear the ghost of my grandfather chuckling at the idea that anyone would object to horses swimming in a ranch pond. He would have found the whole situation hilarious, and he would have been proud that his grandson stood up for what was right. The Mustangs have moved on to their important work protecting America's borders, but their legacy remains in the lessons they taught about courage, dignity, and the importance of staying true to your nature no matter what challenges you face. They showed an entire community that sometimes the most natural solution is also the best solution, and that progress doesn't always require changing everything that came before. In the end, Karen's crusade against the swimming horses accomplished something she never intended. It brought attention to an important federal program, strengthened community bonds, and demonstrated the value of science-based decision-making over emotion-driven activism. The horses she tried so hard to banish became local celebrities, and the program she attempted to shut down became a source of community pride. The pond remains exactly where it's always been, fed by the same spring, supporting the same wildlife, and providing the same opportunities for horses to do what horses have always done. The only difference is that now everyone understands just how important and appropriate those activities really are.